Beck.
Good afternoon, members, and welcome to today's Insights and Innovations webinar. Hosted by News Corp, it's titled Behind the Buzz, Unlocking Culture Through Content. The team have an exciting lineup today with guest editorial panelists, and it's being streamed live from their Fox Sports studios in Artarmon. So without further ado, I'll now pass it on to the man who really needs no introductions, New South Wales Head of Indies, Michael Desiree. Over to you, Desi.
Beck, thank you so much. And is it a happy birthday to you? Happy birthday 3 or 4 days ago, is that correct?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Fantastic. And thank you to the IMAA for allowing this opportunity for News Corp to host the most recent webinar series. And as Beck mentioned, our topic and our theme today is definitely around unlocking culture through content. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, if I can ask you to keep them in the chat, I do have some of my team that will be able to address them through this particular session. We are doing it live, so this is definitely not pre-recorded. So there might be a couple of hiccups, so just please bear with us, but hopefully you'll be able to find something that's going to be insightful in how you move forward with your day-to-day workings, especially within the agencies or obviously with your clients. So first off, I'm going to have Nathan Livingston. Nathan Livingston is our Head of Strategy here at News Corp and works very closely with the independent agencies. He will actually cover the content over the next 15 to 20 minutes. And then after that, you're going to come back to me. And I've got 4 very special guests that I'm going to do an intro after we've finished with Nathan. They're editorial experts in their field, incredible human beings. And again, I need to thank them for their time to hopefully bring you some really insightful information as we move forward. But without further ado, over to you, Nathan.
Thanks, Desi, and thanks everyone for joining us today. In recent times, Australians are reading more news than ever, and with unrivaled scale of audience interacting with our content and context across many verticals, we've gone on a deep dive into the content habits of nearly 16 million Australians to unpack what's been happening in Australian culture over the period January to March 2022, a pivotal time when COVID was lessening. By breaking down what people have been paying attention to across various content categories like finance, sport, and food, we've found some interesting insights and observations around culture. This isn't a report to give you all the answers, but we wanted to leave you with some food for thought. And please reach out if you have any further questions. Don't hesitate to get in contact with us to discuss, as we'd love to help. So, why is this important? It's our belief that culturally salient brands will naturally generate greater attention than those that are out of step with culture, but it's getting harder than ever. The last decade has produced some of the most salient trends and cultural shifts to date, augmented by the advancement of technology, the booming state of social media, and the expansion of the global sharing economy. The result is an increasingly fast-paced marketplace that leaves brands unsure of how to keep up with trends and cultural shifts. Marketers today are faced with hard-hitting questions about how to best use consumer insights to tap into these shifts today to maintain relevancy for tomorrow. And it's clear that consumers want brands to be part of culture, and it's surprisingly important to us when it comes to a consumer's purchase decision. The boom of the data-driven economy is an exciting opportunity for marketers to reach the right consumers, but taking time to go behind the numbers to fully understand the true picture will truly differentiate culturally immersed brands from those that fail to be part of the conversation. And that's what we'd like to talk to you about today. To help us understand what's happening, we've used the Cultural Compass and the Overton Window. The Cultural Compass is a navigation device for understanding, predicting, and capitalizing on shifts in culture. The version you're seeing on screen today is from Faris Jacob, a strategist and also the founder of Genius Steels. Across any number of vectors, culture swings like a pendulum, gaining momentum in one direction before reaching a climax, only to swing back with great force in the opposite direction. Whenever a new change or innovation changes the dynamics of a category, or when massive events force change across categories, a renegotiation takes place along these axes. The Overton Window is a range of acceptable discourse at any moment of time in culture. Originally, it referred to the range of policies that were politically acceptable to the mainstream population at a given time, but the meaning has certainly broadened. When something big happens, it forces a movement, along one of the cultural compass axes as ideas that were previously outside of the eventual window become more acceptable and normal. Such renegotiations will always follow classic adoption curve dynamics in their spread through culture. But ultimately, the window itself moves because there's been a collective renegotiation about what is acceptable and appropriate to the mainstream and what ideas are considered extreme or fringe. We've seen many examples in history, one being when we look at American politics, where many years ago, the USA had their first Black president in Obama, only to swing very radically in the opposite direction to Donald Trump. And suddenly a range of policies we didn't think imaginable were suddenly acceptable. And then years later, the pendulum swung back in the opposite direction again to the more moderate Joe Biden. In doing this work, we've used that cultural compass as a framework and overlaid our data to determine what we see as happening in culture. And the most present theme at this time, of course, was the COVID pandemic, a massive event that had impacted us for the past 2 years, and that's something we've taken into account. Critically, things were changing. COVID was becoming more present, more of us were infected, but far less severe, and we were learning to truly live with COVID as an open society across the nation for the first time in a very long time. If we look at the compass, it's easy to see the renegotiations that have or are currently taking place. Many of us before the pandemic were living to work, and through hardship, we really evaluated the life that we now want to lead. As the pandemic hit, we started lamenting the past, and we saw trends in nostalgia where we were suddenly all baking, or in my case, burning my house down. And most importantly, what frames our research is that again, during the pandemic, we were all in it together. Yet now we are swinging back in the other direction towards individualism. Over Jan to March, COVID was still present, as I mentioned before, but a weaker variant in Omicron and high vaccination rates meant its grip on us was far lessening, and restrictions were loosening and the country was opening up. But we had floods impact us and the war in Ukraine commence. Unsurprising, we see these events accelerate cultural shifts. There are 5 questions asked to create the Consumer Confidence Index. And what we see is that the greatest change among all components of these questions is around uncertainty. Expect good times, bad times, financially in the next 12 months, and expect good or bad times in Australia in the next 5 years. Both show a massive lift in response to some good, some bad. A doubling of the proportion of Australians who are uncertain, which now represents the majority of all Australians. As we move through the remainder of the year, we expect more uncertainty and a greater increase of that due to the cost of living pressure, and our panel will talk about that. We'll be looking to understand this impact as we roll throughout the rest of the year. We cope better with simple or bad feelings about life and our future, while uncertainty is unsettling. We see this on the second column here in Australia's self-perception of their health, showing a sudden and sustained drop from the onset of COVID, but it didn't worsen as the pandemic case numbers exploded. How we feel about our personal health has been impacted by COVID's existence and the uncertainty of its impact if we catch it, not whether we have actually caught COVID. Uncertainty increases our rationale for instant rather than delayed gratification. The actions we take which provide an instant pleasure or happiness surge right now take on greater importance and urgency. We see this in the uplift of comfort foods across both sexes. Among women, we've also seen a doubling of clothing purchases, and among men, a tripling of vaping. So put your vapes down. With that in mind, and for those that saw this research for Q4 in 2021, we've moved on from practical positivity to what we're coining everyday escapism. The pandemic enforced restrictions on our life, meaning we lost all sense of control. Our ability to make our own choices and our lifestyle routines were dramatically interrupted, and the things we enjoy were largely taken away from us. From a significant event that Australians experienced together, we are seeing a shift in focus from we to me as we look to retain a sense of control. The subsiding of the pandemic and a loosening of restrictions meant a shift has happened, but we're unfortunately rolling from the pandemic to floods, war in Europe, and the increasing cost of living pressure. What we're seeing in our data is that in the face of such negativity, Australians are looking to pursue moments of escapism and reclaim some of the simple pleasures that we loved. We still care about what happens in the world, particularly in light of recent events, and we're not taking away from uncertain times on the horizon. But what we see over this time is that such was the impact of COVID. We're not prepared to let go of what ultimately brings pleasure into our lives. We'll now go through a few subject areas from our research, and this is just a small section of what we have available. Please reach out to us if you need any further information or have any data requests. To start with, let's chat about news. Q1 represented a giant step forward for Australia, where for the very first time since the start of the pandemic, COVID-related content failed to feature in our top 5 news stories. The demand for other content categories has risen to eclipse COVID. What we're seeing is a return to a more normal view, much like we would have seen before the pandemic, where there's a much greater diversity of subject matter. Significant news events are something Australians still care about, with the death of Shane Warne being our #1 topic, and the war in Ukraine featuring also. But the remainder of the top 5 relates to parenting, sport, and entertainment. Rather than dwelling on the stories of the pandemic, we are seeing Australians start to curate their content consumption on a wider range of subjects. Now, let's talk about money, a big topic in the country right now. Finance is huge on our network, and when we look at the top articles for the Jan to March period, we can see some really fascinating themes. Despite significant news around petrol prices, cost of living was not yet attaining share of mind. And it's going to be really interesting, as I mentioned before, for us to review this in the next quarter in light of recent news regarding inflation and an upcoming federal election. Particularly in the last week, we're starting to see this become an issue, more present and really worrisome for many Australians. But over Jan to March, our finance page views were up year on year, only 5 of the top 50 articles at that point related to cost of living. The federal government released their budget, yet it did not feature in our top articles. Conversely, Australians were more interested in people winning big in Lotto, which did feature 4 times in the top 25. Australians were particularly interested in finding finance shortcuts, with 5 of the top 25 articles focused on fast money and real-life success stories. And finally, we're seeing some interesting behaviour regarding finance, where readers were jumping back and forth between home loans content and sport and entertainment content. They were constantly shifting between these emotive information-seeking mindsets and supplementing educational content with their passion points. In essence, whether it's subconscious or conscious, they're emotionally curating their consumption of content, which speaks to how effective it's been in commercial content when partners can bring together both emotion and education. What did occupy our minds over this quarter, in no way larger than anything else, was sport. Australians have a remarkable affection for their sport, and sport allows us to escape the everyday, riding the highs and lows of the teams and the sporting celebrities that we're so passionate about. And in the wake of COVID, when we've been so disconnected, this result wasn't surprising to us because sport provides individuals with a sense of shared identity and belonging. Sporting celebs are treated like dear friends, and despite most of us never meeting our sporting heroes, we feel we've got a relationship with them. You can see this reflected in the fact that our top 10 articles were focused on sporting personalities, where people were using the news cycle to follow their favourite sports people. We feel this connection so strongly that when Ash Barty retired at the top of her game and disappeared from the sport, it had a bigger impact on us than her win in the Australian Open, the first female in so long. The biggest stories in sport this quarter were, of course, the Djokovic visa saga, where we were glued to our screens, waiting to see what would happen to the bad boy of tennis, and the sad death of Shane Warne, a true sporting icon that many Australians followed, and it was much like the death of a true friend, and many people felt the loss of someone they'd had a relationship with because they'd followed him for so many years. This ties in nicely with our next area, which is entertainment, where we're seeing Australians seeking escapism through our unashamed thirst for drama. We know that Aussies are pretty addicted to drama, and the big winner in entertainment content is TV, where we've seen growth that's 20% greater than general commercial content. Real-life drama has certainly made a comeback, and on our site, Married at First Sight eclipsed I'm a Celebrity as the most popular reality topic. We think one of the reasons for this is because of the joy that people find in the German term, which is Schadenfreude. And apologies for anyone that got that wrong. Schadenfreude is a German word literally meaning harm, joy. And it's the experience or pleasure or self-satisfaction that comes from learning of or witnessing the troubles, failures, or humiliation of others. When we watched Married at First Sight, we took great delight in seeing those who betrayed others really get what they deserved. Also, 6 of the top 10 articles in entertainment content were about behind-the-scenes drama, perhaps highlighting the fuel that this type of drama provides for conversations with friends. Next is travel, And after recent holidays being stressful, had changing border restrictions, understaffed airports, and families dictating our destinations, we're finally seeing that COVID is done holding us back. We've been embedding some polling across our news sites since early February, and since that time, 75% more Australians are now not bothered by COVID and looking to travel. We're seeing a surge in international destinations, and popularity is growing at the expense of domestic trips. And we really want to escape the everyday and get back to our resort destinations. We're also seeing the resurgence of cruising, something that news we're really happy about. And this is reflected in increasing content consumption related to cruising and also reflected in consumer spend. Lastly, we wanted to talk about food. And as life gets busier again, we're seeing how we engage with food is changing. And we're craving novelty, escape, and ultimately less time in the kitchen. Our desire for convenience through meal delivery is still strong post-COVID, but Taste's healthy section has dropped 8.3%. And when we cook, we want it to be quick and easy. This is a significant change from what we saw during COVID times. When we dine out, we want something that's different, unique, and special. And we see this reflected in our eat out stories, with one example about Australia's first cheese train. It's much like a sushi train, only with cheese going around the circle, and that opened recently in Geelong. Aussies are also merging their passions together with travel-related food content featuring our top articles. So that's just a small selection. I'm going to throw back to Desi before we then discuss with the panel.
Nice work, Nathan. I could not think of anything worse than a cheese train with my my dairy intolerances, and no vapes. Yep, married first sight. That's an interesting session there in itself. Hey guys, thank you so much for holding in with us, and I thought some of that information was super insightful. And now to our special guest, our panelists. So I wanted to introduce you to the amazing Ticky Fullerton. Ticky is going to be leading our finance conversation. She is the business editor at large for the Australian Finance. Kerry Warren is here leading the charge for entertainment. She's our sections editor at news.com.au and looks after things such as entertainment, tech, and lifestyle. Sarrah LeMarquand, the amazing Sarrah LeMarquand, will be heading up the food and travel category. She is the editor-in-chief of Stellar Body and Soul. And then finally, but definitely not least, Brenton, who is leading the sport pillar and is the editor of foxsports.com.au. Firstly, welcome and thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to seeing some of the answers that you guys come up with today. The first question, or the first series of questions, is going to be around world and the impacts of COVID, not the virus itself, but are now the focus of COVID articles. The first one's going to be with most state restrictions now lifted, Australia's returning to a new normal, essentially. My question is, which states or industries are going to find the journey back to normal easy? What states are going to find, or industries going to find the journey back to normal easy or hard? Ticky, I think I'm going to throw this one to you.
Yeah, just an easy one to start with.
Yeah.
So look, we all know that this is a mad world, and everyone's still wondering whether actually we do go back to normal or whether there's a new normal. I think the state thing is easy to knock off because we have, thankfully, managed to get Western Australia back in line with the rest of us. And I think it's just wonderful to be, heading out to footy games and, being physical. And so that is really changing after we've had this huge online obsession. In terms of the industries, I think that's all still playing out now. As you've mentioned, the war in Ukraine, we've got the China lockdowns. These things are really creating problems for us in terms of supply chain. Everyone's thinking about national security of goods. So you're seeing, as we come back to the new normal, you're seeing, for example, some retail doing really well if they've managed to champion and get their omni-channel thing working. You've seen almost maybe though some retail outlets really struggling. The CBD is still a real work in progress. And I think some of the real winners in this are infrastructure in last mile logistics. That's an absolute winner. Other things are really struggling, including some areas of travel. So that's just a couple.
Yeah, super interesting. I'm going to probably ask you another question, if that's okay. So COVID has driven a large increase in the level of uncertainty among Australians. And with the war in Ukraine, as we just mentioned, upcoming election uncertainty looks certain to stay or increase, right? What does this mean for Australians?
Yeah, look, I reckon that once the election is out of the way, that'll be a good thing, because there will be more certainty about which direction we might be heading in. But clearly, we've got this big meeting tomorrow with the Reserve Bank, which almost all of the market, 100%, think that there's going to be a rise in the cash rate, which was sitting at 0.1%. So that is going to kick off, and it's already, people are obsessed with mortgages and their houses and what indeed might happen with their super. All these sorts of questions are making people think again. But I think it's about managing expectations of the public, because we've been through, while it's been really scary these last 2 years, we've also had the most enormous amount of support. So there's some savings there. For those who don't have mortgages, maybe they'll have to start, who do, they'll have to start paying things off. But for those that haven't, there's still savings there. And I think, you know, you're going to find Australians are going to be incredibly grateful for having that connection with their job through JobKeeper. And that, now we go on from here. But I think there will be a management of expectations.
Yeah, and I think just to your point around inflations, I think all of those savings that we've decided to put away is going to get eaten up pretty quickly, based upon the cost of living.
Great.
Kerry, just one for you, just still on this topic. So as people began to return to work and choose not to return to their past jobs, we're calling it the Great Resignation, which is what's been coined to describe that phenomenon. My question is the phenomenon real? And if so, I guess, why is it happening?
It is definitely very real. It's played out over the last few months in the US and the UK in particular. It is starting to happen in Australia now, and I think it's quite easy to understand why. The pandemic changed everything for us basically overnight, and it's not ending that way. It's kind of trickling out. It's a bit harder to see a clear end date, and changing your job is a way of being like, I am done with this. I'm moving on to the next thing now. It's like a forced restart, I guess. Yeah. That is really appealing after 2.5 years of so much uncertainty. Yeah,
no, I couldn't agree anymore. Okay, we're going to move on to business and finance. And Ticky, I think this is definitely well and truly your focus. And when we think about business and finance, we think of money, and we're looking for shortcuts to get ahead. So hopefully, you know, we might be able to find some tips or tricks through that. This question's an interesting one. It's a pretty big one, but post the First World War, we saw the Roaring '20s, right? And it took place, which was a period of prosperity and excess. But in the 50s, post World War II, people were most astir. So we are currently seeing everyday escapism play out in the culture and people, but there are significant issues on the horizon. Given that context, would we expect to see a period much like the Roaring '20s in the future?
I don't think we're going to roar this year. I mean, you've already seen the market come back literally over the weekend. Look at the NASDAQ, all these tech stocks betting. And that's what happens when people think interest rates are going to be going up. So I don't think we're going to roar in the same way. But I would say, look, when I came to Australia in 1990, and I took out my first mortgage in Australia, I took a 16% interest rate on that mortgage. Now, people just can't envisage that. So this mortgage increase is going to be slow to start with, but I think it is going to reset people's thinking. I think in terms of what we're interested in and what we're not, there will be fascination with, or desperation in some ways, to look at new things like crypto and other sort of stuff. But I would say, you know, caution there, because this is where I think it's really important. Our traditional mastheads, we've had this huge amount of fake news, and the attraction, I think, of the public towards our more traditional media to actually make sure we've got people thinking about finance in the right way is really important.
Yeah, great. Yep, couldn't agree more. Fast, easy, lotto are all popular themes among our readers and support our notion of hedonistic healing. As interest rate rises and potentially our government changes, where should Australians focus their finance attention?
Look, it's pretty exciting, isn't it? And everybody's been getting into, particularly, making bets, and sport is, we're going to hear, I'm sure. It's just absolutely the new thing, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it comes back to how much cash you have. I mean, I do have real concerns about some spaces, and particularly, say, cryptos and NFTs and all that sort of place where people really don't understand where this is all heading. You can see why people want to make a punt and look at upside. And I think that's going to go on as people get back out to sport as well, for example. But I just think there will be some checking as well.
Yeah. Any good tips in terms of cryptocurrencies that I need to?
I'm not going to tip you in any direction into cryptocurrencies or NFTs. I might tell you no.
Fantastic. Well, in terms of that increase in interest rates, I might have a house for sale pretty soon, so I might be coming to you for some more advice. Right. One more on the topic, and it's definitely around cryptocurrency. So online-only banks and digital wallets and booming PNPL market mean consumers have more choices regarding their personal and business finances than ever before. Question is financial literacy keeping up with finance? And what impact does this have on Australians who are doing it tough?
So no, this is not, we're not keeping up, and it's a constant battle for people like me in serious business and personal finance to try and make sure that message is getting out. It's a runaway train, and it's not going to go back. Digital is here. It's really convenient. It's really important. But buy now, pay later, for example, is really an area that I think, if for people who are doing it tough, I think that's a space that's, I'm keeping a watch on anyway, because at the moment, these guys aren't part of the Credit Act. So it means that level of accountability is still to play through. And I think as things tighten, we're going to get more focus on that.
Very interesting. And thank you very much for that insight. Sport. Brenton. So sport. So all of the top 10 sports articles in Q1 focus on specific sports stars. My question to you, is the focus on the stars over the sports themselves a good thing for sport as a whole?
It's a really interesting question. I think ultimately, yes, because I think we engage with people, and sports stars now, there's so much more access to them than ever before. They've got their own social media profiles, so we sort of hang on their every word. And quite often, they become bigger than the team or the sport. I mean, you only have to look at something like the Australian Open that just passed. You sort of have two sides of it. You've got the whole Novak Djokovic visa saga, which people that maybe not have been huge sports fans tuned into, and that might have been their gateway into the sport to find other news lines around that. And the other side of it was the Nick Kyrgios and Thanasi Kokkinakis combination, special Ks as they've been dubbed. I mean, how many people would have really actively followed the men's doubles tournament? Maybe not that many, but they inspired the nation. They're, not everyone loves them. In fact, quite opposite. Some people, loathe them, but they're entertaining. And I think that's what we need in this day and age. We need characters, and sometimes they go above the sport and the code.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Woodies was the last time that I saw men's doubles and paid so much interest in that as well. Which is interesting, actually, just talking about tennis. So Q1 in the tennis coverage was up 147% year on year. What does Ash Barty's retirement mean for the future of Australian tennis? ? And then the second one to dovetail into this, are we seeing more individualism from our sports stars?
Well, I think it's a bit worrying for the future of Australian tennis. I mean, I had a little look at the rankings, and obviously she was our golden girl, inspired so many young boys and girls to take up the sport. And I think Alex Dimonor was our next highest ranked player in the 20s, and then Aya Tomljanovic, made a middle of that, but she's in the 70s, and then really it falls into our highest ranked players in the hundreds. So to lose Ash Barty, she was someone that Tennis Australia could really market to people to take up the sport. So I worry a little bit that we've lost that person who was identifiable, who was at the pointy end of tournaments, creating headlines for all the right reasons. So I think there would be some concern there about the next crop. I mean, obviously Nick Kyrgios, everyone holds out hope that he'll get it together in one way or another. But really, I think it's the stocks are looking a bit thin.
Yeah.
And in terms of individualism, sorry to touch on your other point, I think absolutely. I mentioned earlier social media. these players and these, whether it's teams or in individual sports like tennis and golf, they know the power of their own social media platforms. They have a direct conversation with fans, which traditionally they weren't able to have. So as a result, we know so much more about them than ever before, and they play to that, and they market themselves in that way. So absolutely, I think that's only going to increase.
Great. And one more for you. So sport has been the antidote to the pandemic. I know I well and truly watched a lot of sport through that period, and increasing in coverage and interest during that particular peak. Do you see the growth of sport, both from an at-home and live perspective, continuing long term?
I think I do. I think the last couple of years have reminded people, reinforced how important sport is in our lives. Most of us play it to some degree. We have a team we follow across multiple codes, and this probably reinforced that it's an escape for everyone. It's a chance to sort of take your mind off the million other things that are going on. It was COVID, then it's the Ukraine war, it might be the election, which we obviously are all very important, but sometimes you want to break from. And I think the last 2 years have just reinforced that sport is part of our identity, whether it's following an individual, as we just discussed, or the Parramatta Eels, which I unfortunately have the pleasure of following.
First mistake.
And I think that it's strengthened those ties the last couple of years, and I think it will just continue. And from a website point of view for Fox Sports, we're seeing that on a daily basis.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm a Doggies supporter, so it was a fantastic game on the weekend for finally us to actually get up. So yeah, but I don't know about Parramatta. I don't think they're going to do fantastic this year. Okay, moving on to entertainment, the amazing Kerry. So entertainment content is being driven by our unshamed thirst for pleasures, guilty or otherwise. And Married at First Sight was obviously a very clear example of that. Celebrity content has always performed really, really, really well for us at News. Has the notion of celebrity changed since COVID? And if so, how?
It's actually hard to conceive of a time when the notion of celebrity has changed both as comprehensively and as quickly as it has during COVID. Basically, overnight, parties were cancelled, red carpets were cancelled, premieres were cancelled. Celebrities couldn't even go get papped doing their grocery shopping because masks made those photos basically unusable. Yeah. And a lot of them turned to, like we all did, social media. But what they'd always done to get the likes, which is, those extravagant home tours, the amazing parties, the huge holidays, suddenly enraged their fans, who a lot of whom had lost their jobs, were really struggling with COVID. And something we were repeatedly being told was that we're all in this together, but then you've got Ellen DeGeneres comparing her mansion to a jail. You've got Madonna talking about COVID being the great equalizer, literally sitting in a bathtub full of rose petals. And you've got Kim Kardashian going to a private island for an amazing maskless 40th birthday party, while literally tens of thousands of Americans are dying every day. So it didn't go great for them. But at the same time, we saw a massive spike at news.com.au of interest in, I guess, what you would call more worthy celebrities. Everything we did on Kerry Chant, for example, just went absolutely ballistic. You had 70,000 people a day dialing in to watch Facebook Lives with Gladys and with Dan Andrews. And it was really phenomenal, the rise of these kind of stars as celebrities. But having said that, as we're coming out the other end, it's snapping back extremely quickly. The biggest stories we've had in the last few weeks have been Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, Will Smith, all of that stuff. And now that parties and red carpets and premieres and all of that are back, it's hard to see anything happening here except acceleration.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to maybe hosting the Logies after this particular session, or even maybe the Oscars next year. I can be the Chris Rock of News Corp. So year on year, TV-related content has grown about 20% faster than general entertainment content, with 6 of the top 10 entertainment items related to drama behind the characters in popular shows. My question is, why do you think Australia's obsession with the behind-the-scenes drama has eclipsed their interest in the shows themselves?
I think it's largely because the way we watch television has changed so much. Yeah. There are less and less people watching TV live, instead watching it on catch-up services or streaming something else entirely. So we're not all watching the same thing that we were watching with friends and family and stuff anymore. Everybody's watching something different. But the drama behind big shows is something anyone can get interested in, anybody's around. And even if you don't watch the show, Married at First Sight is actually a great example of that for us, because all of the content that we were doing on the show and the drama behind it at news.com.au ended up like being seen by more people than were actually watching the shows. And I think a large part of that is everybody loves a pile-on, especially when you're at home in COVID, you're feeling depressed, you're feeling not so great. It's a cheap thrill to get on and have very strong opinions about someone else. And also, unlike commenting on restrictions or vaccination mandates or that kind of thing, you can air your opinion about television without being trolled or without being called an anti-vaxxer or without any of that kind of thing. It's also a great way to connect with family and friends because it's something you can all talk about together. Yeah, so it was something that...
Yep, I definitely almost got divorced a couple of times through maths with my wife and our opinions on certain things that were happening. Last one for you. COVID changed the way we have consumed entertainment content, as we've mentioned. How many of those changes are here to stay, in your opinion?
I think, as I said, live television viewing is in decline and streaming has boomed, like especially in 2021 and 2020. A lot of people, particularly in the 50+ age group, were viewing streaming platforms for the first time. And I think that's largely, it's partly convenience, but also as the pandemic kind of dragged on, a lot of adults were moderating and regulating their news intake because it is scary and depressing. And so streaming platforms offered this incredible escape because there's none of that content on there. You can go on, you can escape the world for a few hours, and it's going to be very, very hard now that that switch has happened to get those people back, I think. They might come back for, like, for example, we saw with the Olympics last year, people will come back for big events, but they're going straight back to streaming afterwards. It's interesting though, streaming is having a reckoning of its own at the moment. Like Netflix has had a massive drop in subscriber numbers and also share prices and stuff, which I think is really because people want a bit of that water cooler TV vibe back. They want like the build up and anticipation of a new episode dropping. They want to go back to that like once a week release date rather than just not watching the same stuff as your friends, watching whatever, whenever. And so I think that's something that is definitely we're going to see interesting things in the streaming space.
Do you think Netflix will bounce back?
I don't know that Netflix will bounce back unless they change the way that they are like releasing content, because I just think we've moved past that real binge heavy, like watching an entire episode in 3 days. We don't have that kind of time anymore, and that's not the kind of thing that we're after. Movies are another thing. I don't know that they're going to come back because like at the moment we're still 50% of what movie attendance in Australia was pre-pandemic. So there's a lot of ground that we need to make there too.
Super interesting.
One interesting aspect of that shift in the streaming services that you're talking about, Kerry, was the HBO Max series Just Like That, which was the reboot to Sex and the City. So that aired over December and January and was a global hit. So did absolutely massive numbers in the US, but also in the UK and here in Australia where it's screened on Binge. And what was interesting about that was that they dropped an episode once a week at the same time. So it was Thursday night here in Australia, and it really rekindled that sort of water cooler moment. And that set a little bit of a global precedent. And I think with the reckoning that's happening with Netflix, we might see streaming try to tap into that traditional free-to-air model where there is that sort of appointment viewing, because even if people didn't like the show, they couldn't stop talking about it. And it's really because they were getting drip fed it.
Yeah, fascinating. Be interesting to sort of see what the introduction to ads to Netflix is going to then do to that end.
I think what this says, though, it's about the cost of new content, isn't it? I mean, Netflix has been this pioneer, really, in terms of the amount of content that it's been spitting out. And, it's having to have a bit of a, a aha moment.
Or a
hence the
correction.
ads.
Is it overwhelming how much there is to choose from sometimes? I mean, the old model, when you talk about the drip feed, and you knew that episode was coming, and it sort of guided you towards it. Whereas you go into something like Netflix now, and there's what do I look at? There's so much to choose from. I wonder if that has a
Desi, can you hear us? No. Desi, if you can hear us, we've lost audio.
COVID reality that's staying with us. So they want fine dining quality, but they want it at home. So you've got services like Providor and a lot of other high-end services where they are getting top restaurants delivering food at home. Now that is showing signs of actually escalating. Yeah. So people definitely want to spend a lot less time in their kitchen, but they don't want to compromise on quality. Yep. In terms of dining outside of the home, the appetite literally has never been greater. Restaurants, obviously across the country, are dealing with a decline in staffing availability, and they're not able to keep up with demand. So most restaurants are able to take about 70% capacity. Obviously, there's a state-by-state fluctuation, as your first question to Ticky alluded to, that we're not seeing an even national recovery. But in, say, a city like Sydney, the demand is at 100% in terms of wait lists, and the restaurants that are operating at 70%, like I say, people just can't wait to get back out on dine with their friends again in high-end restaurants.
Yeah, I agree. I was mentioning it to you before. I was at the launch for Delicious Month Out, which is sponsored by American Express over at Chill House. So I think it's an incredible time to be able to get out and get amongst it. One more question on food. We're seeing convenience and indulgence being prioritised over health. What do you think this means for healthy eating in Australia? And do you see this being a short-term or a long-term behaviour?
Well, one of the titles I publish is Body and Soul. So we know for a fact that Australians have actually never been more interested in health. So while there is, some of the data suggests that they're not necessarily looking for healthy restaurants. And again, a theme that's been touched upon today is people are giving themselves a bit of a break. They think, I've been through a lot the last 2 years. I just want to enjoy myself a little bit. But we're definitely seeing a big spike in plant-based eating, and that's happening at home and in restaurants. So for example, a restaurant that a lot of people would be familiar with, Chiswick, very popular restaurant in Sydney that turns 10 this year. Now, when it turns 10 this week, I apologise. Now, when it launched, its most famous dish was its slow-cooked lamb shoulder. But interesting fact that not many people know this, they don't advertise it, 70 to 90% of the food that they actually move in that restaurant is plant-based. And there's a lot of home delivery services and restaurants that are increasingly focusing on plant-based. I think the other thing when we talk about health is that there's been an absolutely massive spike in the non-alcoholic options. So we're seeing those figures double in terms of groceries and the main retailers. So that's mocktails, and there's been a lot of progress in terms of the quality of non-alcoholic wines, but we're starting to see that trickle through to the hospitality industry too. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Last topic to talk about before I impart you with a question for the group: travel, the all important travel. And after obviously an extremely stressful after a year of stressful domestic trips, we're done letting COVID obviously hold us back, and you can see a lot of people sort of taking that next step. Interest year on year in domestic travel has halved. Interest in international travel has more than doubled, and Australians are spending again on cruises, which is fantastic. Should travel and tour operators offer the same products that were available pre-COVID, or is this the opportunity for new products and new operators to grab market share? It's a huge opportunity for people to reinvent themselves and for tour operators to, I'm going to use the dreaded word, to pivot. So you talk about cruising, that for instance, I think there'll be a huge focus on wellness tourism. In fact, the global wellness tourism sector is projected to be worth $640 billion by 2024. And one of the biggest sectors for that will be cruising. So it's traditionally been involved with, gorging at the buffet and drinking yourself into a stupor. We're going to see the opposite of that happening. So at the moment, most global tourist operators are not equipped for that. They might have a gym, they might have spa, but it really really is about getting dietitians on board. It's about having mindfulness. We're seeing the definition of health change. It's a lot about mental health now. And if we can cater to that on cruising, we're going to be able to really tap into that $640 billion.
Fantastic. One more question for travel. We're seeing indulgent or maybe luxury experiences increasing in demand. Which luxury experiences do you think will drive the biggest interest in travel?
Well, this has been a recurring theme of the discussion today, and it really comes back to what you were talking about earlier with that everyday escapism.
Yeah.
So one of the pivots that we saw happening in tourism with the focus on intrastate tourism is that when international tourists come to another country, they want to explore the Indigenous culture. So New Zealand is a great example of this. Their most lucrative tourism sector was Maori cultural tourism. But because local people, domestic travellers aren't interested in that, the focus shifted to just having fun. So you saw Indigenous tourist outlets become about celebrating lakeside location, gone fishing, literally gone fishing. So that's going to be the focus. It's about travelling to Fiji. It's about travelling to Bali. It's about going to Hawaii. It's about lying by the pool guilt-free with a cocktail or a mocktail, referred to my previous answer. So that's really where it's going to be. It's also about experiences. People want to make up for lost time. They actually want to jump out of planes and they want to go and do crazy things. I went on a flying fox in January. I'm absolutely risk-averse person. If I'm doing it, that just shows you people really want to push themselves outside of their comfort zone.
Sounds fantastic.
No one's actually been out of the country. So if you want to go and have a slice of heaven in New Zealand, that's fine. But you know, these things are, people haven't been to Asia, people haven't been to back to the US, can't go to St. Petersburg, but you can go pretty much anywhere else. You know, it's fantastic.
I'd rather stay in the plane as opposed to jumping out of it.
Oh, come on.
Quite safe for that. Okay, so closing question to all, and Ticky, I might start off with you, and this will be the same question for each of you. So with everyday escapism prevalent in Australia, what's something you've done, big or small, to escape in the past year?
Look, I think that's a very difficult question because I didn't work from home. You know, central service all the way through, like many of these guys here.
Yeah.
So, look, I think I have really enjoyed a little bit more quality time with my young man, who's 14, and so that's been, and taking him off to a few things. We've actually, particularly recently, we went to the Oils, we went to Crowded House, all my kind of stuff. But you know, one day he'll be grateful. But you know, getting out and going to a few real concerts has been really fun.
Fantastic. Brenton, you?
I think golf has been my sort of escape. I mean, our sort of world we live in, we're connected to our phones so much, and working from home has probably only increased that connection to your phone. And golf for me has been a way to sort of put it to the side and get a few hours of quality time where I'm not bothered. So being able to, I was lucky enough to be able to play a bit through the pandemic. And yeah, it's definitely my sort of safe space, I guess.
Right, and then watching the Eels lose as well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up again. Cheers.
And Kerry, what about you?
I bought a whole truffle. Yeah, it was
Fantastic.
an unusual pivot from me, but I bought a truffle and then I got a whole bunch of new recipes and cooked them for family and friends, and yeah.
Lovely. Great. And definitely last but not least, Sarah, what about you?
Well, mine is a little bit strange. I actually decided this would be the year I would take up a hobby, because it's quite common as an adult to realise that you haven't maybe indulged in a hobby since you were in high school, in my case. So I've taken up singing.
Oh.
And yes, I will be available to sing at weddings,
Brilliant.
partings,
Right.
and everything.
Are you able to sing today for the...
Absolutely. Please send through your request and I'd be more than happy to sing a song down the barrel of the camera. But I think that also taps into something we were talking about, making up for lost time, and just thinking, what is something I can do for myself this year?
Fantastic. Great. Massive thank you again for the time. I'm hoping that everybody that's watching has found that insightful. There is going to be a recording of this, so you'll be able to watch that. If you do have any questions, by all means, you can fill them through to me or your News Corp rep. But I'm going to allow Nathan to just give us a bit of an update in relation to our Decoded event that's soon to be happening.
Thanks, Desi. I feel like we're going to lose you to a TV career and Sarah to a singing career, so we'll be looking for some new team members at News Corp soon, I think. We've got 3 quick macro recommendations from the research that you saw a little bit earlier. The first one we have for you is to pursue target audience as individuals over a collective, recognizing that shift that's happening in culture. We're pretty well past that blanket messaging of being all in it together that some brands leveraged during COVID, and people want to feel like they're being spoken to now as individuals. So carefully think about targeting and also the messaging approach that you have as well. The second one on screen is to find the novelty. Figure out what's really special about your brand and how it can provide a unique experience to your customers. And the third and last point is to communicate with empathy. During COVID, I think we all had one of those examples where brands we hadn't even heard with for a very long time popped up in our emails saying, "We're here for you." And as the future looks uncertain and change happens rapidly, brands need to truly understand the needs, wants, and feelings of their target audience as things change rapidly to generate attention. That's something we can help you with. Coming up next week is our Decoded event. At that event, and you can register for the webinar, I think one of the guys is going to put the link in the chat for you now, you can hear about our digital and data roadmap for the future. And one of the exciting innovations that we want to share with you today ahead of that event, and a bit of a sneak peek that can help you with all the insight that we've spoken about, and recognizing that every brand and every brief is different, is our new tool called Content Connect. And we've got a bit of a brief video to show you that now.
Announcing our new insight tool, Content Connect, to help bring you the science, to understand what and how your audience want to hear from you, and what is truly relevant to them. Powered by News Connect's audience intelligence, Content Connect gives us a deep look at what our target audiences are reading and watching across the network of more than 20 sites every day. From those 15.7 million Australians visiting the network every month, we're analysing their every content choice. In other words, we're looking at those true measures of engagement and attention that help us understand their real interests. And it's not just what articles they're viewing and the videos they're watching. It's how much time they're spending on them, which ones they're completing, and which ones they're commenting on. We'll also show you which sites they're spending the most time on, and the major content categories they prefer consuming. Do you want to know what international travel intenders have been reading and watching over the last week? We'll show you. We'll also show you that international travel intenders are 7 times more likely to visit vogue.com.au. That in addition to travel content, they also like to read about entertainment and lifestyle. Then, of course, we'll also show you their demographics and that the audience skews female. They're affluent and likely to be over 35. All of this then becomes powerful insight to inform your creative and content strategies. You can now harness the same information that powers our newsrooms to inform your advertising and content strategy. Want to grow your business through the power of content? Talk to News Corp today.
So a really exciting innovation that's going to power a lot of the work we talked to you about today about culture, and something that we can work with you on bespoke insight that will help you power your strategies as you move forward. So that's what we've got for you today. Get in contact with us if you want any further information. I'll just throw it back to you, Chris Rock.
Anyway, thank you. Guys, a massive, massive thank you. Thank you very much for staying in with us. Hopefully you found that insightful or informative. Definitely reach out to your respective News Corp rep if you've got any questions. A massive thank you to our panelists, Ticky, Brenton, Sarrah, and Kerry. Well done. Fantastic careers ahead of you. Nath, again, great work. Fantastic. And then thank you again to everybody behind the scenes for making this possible. Beck, hopefully that was great on your end. Let us know if there's any